Right, good morning, members. We did have a previous meeting, and Councillor Rain's gone on the building tour, so I was giving him a couple of minutes, but we've got well behind time now, so I will start. I've got apologies for absence first, and I know Patience is substituting for Nicola, and Nick's here, he's just enjoying his tour somewhere, so we have got a full house, I think.
Toby Neal is on other council business.
Oh, of course, yes. Thank you. And then I've got declarations of interest, if any members have any, or officers. I don't see any. Thank you. And then I've got the minutes of the meeting from the 14th of January, which is pages 3 to 8 of the report. I'll move those minutes. Has anybody got any questions, comments? Nothing? Can someone second me, please? Thanks, Scott. All happy to accept those minutes as printed? Yeah. Perfect. Oh, we're getting fast. Right. Item 4 is the service delivery performance report, which is pages 9 to 22. Before we go into the body of the report, which Mick's going to help us with and present, I've got 2 questions from our colleagues in the Fire Brigades Union. So if you want to come in whenever you're ready, guys.
All right. Thank you. First question is the availability figures for appliances such as Hucknall and Eastwood, to name a few, may appear high according to this report. However, on an ever-increasing frequency, these appliances are being used to provide standby cover at Ashfield Fire Station, leaving Hucknall and Eastwood, along with other areas, without any fire cover. If an incident occurs in their own area, the public will have a delayed response to any incident, putting lives at risk. Are the Fire Authority prepared to continue taking this risk to support a failing day shift crewing system at Ashfield?
Thank you for that. So in both sets of questions, I've got a formal answer, and then at the end I'll make a few personal comments after that. So the operational response for the city and the county is balanced across and provided by all stations, and further supported through cross-border mutual assistance, and is therefore not reliant upon the closest station in isolation. The service is well practiced in routinely deploying its resources flexibly to ensure that appropriate cover is maintained. This may be to deal with the unavailability of whole time as well as on-call appliances, or indeed large and protracted incidents. Management continues to work with the workforce and representative bodies to ensure that all response appliances, including the 18 on-call, are available as is practicable, but recognises the national as well as the local challenge for the on-call system. Thank you.
Second question. When day shift crewing was implemented by this authority, the residents in the affected areas were told it would not result in a reduction in fire cover. The figures published by the service show that where there used to be a whole-time appliance at Ashford and Retford, which provided almost unbroken 24-hour cover 365 days of the year, this has now been replaced by an on-call appliance providing an inferior level of cover. In simple terms, both of Ashfield's appliances are unavailable between the hours of 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. for an cumulative total of 562 hours, or 40 14-hour shifts over the course of a year. Both of Retford's appliances are unavailable for a total of 970 hours, or 69 14-hour shifts. Given the recent fire deaths in Ashfield, the statistics provided by the service, and the recent recommendations set out in the fire cover review, specifically in relation to the day shift crewing stations, will this authority commit to reversing the changes at the affected day shift crewing stations, fulfilling its commitment to the public as agreed by consultation to maintain and not reduce the level of fire cover?
Thank you. So the written answer is the introduction of day shift crewing was implemented in response to continued reductions in the service's budget and followed some public consultation exercise. Those financial pressures continue for Nottinghamshire as it implements the 22 to 25 Community Risk Management Plan. The on-call system covers the majority of the United Kingdom landmass and is underpinned by the great dedication of those who work for Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service. The majority of response cover in Nottinghamshire is provided by the on-call model, which is recognised as challenging but not considered as inferior. It must also be recognised that the recent tragic incidents in the area were responded to within the standards set by the authority, and once again underpins the strong need to focus upon prevention activities to drive down risk. Operational response through strategic assessment of risk is just one element of the services delivered to communities alongside prevention and protection aimed at keeping them safe from fire. Any future changes to the delivery model will need to balance all those community services and be delivered within the financial resources available to the authority. Given the global economic climate, this will no doubt be a challenge, and the authority will continue to work with the workforce and communities to drive down risk and make communities safer. Now, I wanted to add some personal comments because, as members know, and colleagues in the FBU, I'm particularly parochial about Ashfield Fire Station. I literally live 300 yards away from it and see the excellent service it is, and of course, geographically, it's a very important strategic station for the motorway corridor for TRAs, and of course, I've been very well integrated with the community in the tragedies that's happened. I think members of the FBU will know as well that in 2018 I was the solitary member that voted against these changes, and I think it's safe to say that my view has not personally changed, and that my preference is always for whole-time crewing at Ashfield Station. Ashfield is the largest district in Nottinghamshire by population and by housing. It's a dense population. We have high areas of deprivation, and we have a number of large sites like Kingsmill Hospital. We have the largest secondary school in Europe. We have chemical factories. We have a huge set of bespoke challenges. And I think, as I always said from 2018 and from 2009 when I first got on this authority, I think Ashfield and the wider service is best served by a whole-time crew. That said, I absolutely recognise the reductions to the budget. I think we all have swallowed some really tough pills over the last couple of years, and even personally, it's the first time in some 12 years on the authority where I've voted for a council tax rise, because we've seen the budget challenges. What I want to say is that my personal feeling, and I'm lucky enough because the independents won enough seats to now have a position with a stronger voice on the authority. My personal feeling is that the crewing's not quite right for Ashfield, and after a number of deliberations with the chair and with the incoming chief, they have assured me of a new review taking place of the crewing. So it's 4 years in. I think it's right in terms of time now anyway. But over the summer and reporting back early autumn, we'll be undertaking a full review of the crew in Ashfield Station, and seeing what gaps there is, what improvements there is. I've been assured by the chief that will include a full consultation with the FBU, with station staff there and with members, and we hope to have a report back probably to full authority rather than this committee, although there might be hops in between September, October, so that we can look at some positive changes there. That's my personal view. Thank you for your questions. Thank you. Right, Mick,
Thank you, Chair.
over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to canter through the first part of the report. And the reason that I will move through it quite quickly is because on pages of your pack, pages 10, 11 and 12, it's quite pleasing to report that performance and activity levels are within the parameters that we would expect, except for ones that we've previously reported to members, and that's essentially to do with some spike of fire calls that were received in the early part of 2021 and 22. The points to note on page 11, there is it's pleasing to report that percentage-wise we've had a reduction in terms of the number of unwanted fire signals that we've attended. However, there is still an increase, as Bryn will cover off in a minute, in terms of the numbers we attend. So we've still got more work to do on that. And you'll be aware that as part of our CRMP, we've made a commitment to reduce by a further 3%. So we've set ourselves a challenging target, but quite right, a target that we will work towards. It's also pleasing to report on page 12 that the service is achieving and exceeding its attendance times target. As you'll be very much aware, the authority has a target that we will attend incidents in an average of 8 minutes, currently performing, and we're attending incidents in an average of 7 minutes 49. So it's really pleasing to be able to report that to members. In terms of page 13, on-call availability, I'd like to point out that there's been some excellent work, and we have 10 of the 16 sections. We have 18 appliances overall, but we have 16 sections. 10 of these are achieving the attainment level. We continue to work hard with those that struggle to make those level of attainment. And the dedication and commitment shown by on-call firefighters is absolutely staggering, and it's really pleasing to report over the period of this report, again, Warsaw, which we've previously reported against, and Hucknall have achieved 97% availability, which is absolutely a credit to those individuals and to the community. Moving on to on-call availability. What I've introduced is another graph at page 14, so we can keep a more balanced view on the challenges that we have in terms of on-call availability. And as you'll note at the top of page 14, there is a notable decrease in availability. And further analysis shows that decrease in availability is primarily due to some of the challenges we have experienced at specific sections. And it's a great opportunity to continually draw our attention to the challenges that we have in terms of on-call recruitment. This particular one, when we looked at further analysis, shows that we've had some challenges, particularly around Bingham and in Eastwood. And they are predominantly down to crewing individuals, and due to the very nature of it, if people leave, it does create a gap, and the constant recruitment is key that we continue this. But the decrease in availability has been noted, and we are working along with the support of the sustainability of on-call team to be able to prioritise and focus on these sections. As previously requested by members, we report both on the availability for Ashfield day shift crewing and Retford on-call crewing. And as you can see there are some challenges that have been identified and previously discussed. Even though I would note, particularly at Retford, the section seems to go from strength to strength, and we are seeing very much improving levels of availability. So that's pleasing to report. On page 15, this is essentially a summary of the performance that we continually monitor with regards to our commitments and our work that we do with Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service regarding joint control. And whilst the top graph does identify a drop in performance, further analysis, which is the graph beneath it, does really show that whilst there is a drop in performance in terms of the time answered to answer all fire calls, the priority and the time and effort has been clearly put on answering the correct calls. And what I mean by that is the most significant calls in terms of, as we determine, P1 and P2, which are essentially calls that have the potential to put life at risk or property at risk, and the more significant calls, they are being answered and dealt with very, very efficiently and achieving the targets that we've set as a service. Very quickly on, it's been previously reported to the committee that we continue to work with our supplier for the mobilising system, which is Sistel. We've recently undertaken a hardware restructure within joint control with the aim of maintaining and improving the performance of the Sistel. It's not, excuse me, it's still not quite where we would like it to be, but the hardware restructure has shown some improvements in performance. So we'll continue to work with our suppliers regarding that. Chair, I'll pause there if there's any.
Thank you, Mick. Has anybody got any questions or comments so far, Eddie?
Yeah, just on page 11, I'm just curious, the two graphs, the top one, instant breakdown, it says fire, April 21, it was well above 500, and then deliberately secondary fires, well above 250. I just wondered, was Is there some reason why it sort of like peaked really high there?
It did, yeah, and when we analysed the peak, there was a number of factors, and if we remember back, we experienced quite a warm period in April. We also experienced it when some of the relaxation of the COVID restrictions, and what we tend to find as a result of that, the activity in terms of secondary fires increased, and specifically, Bryn might come in a minute, but specifically it was around the secondary fires in terms of grassland, open, rubbish fires,
Oh, right.
and it's very difficult to say, but we suspected, and we did do some follow-up work, we suspected it was a specific area within the county, within the Mansfield Oakwood estate.
Oak Tree Lane estate, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just come in at that point. So
Yeah.
yeah, we did experience a peak at that time. I suppose it's worth mentioning that any time we get extreme weather, so if it's really hot, we're busy. If it's really windy, we're busy with dangerous structures. If it's really wet, we're busy with flooding. So whenever we get an extreme weather event, we're really, really busy. Specifically, what Mick's referring to there is a peak of deliberate fire setting that we've had on the Oak Tree Lane estate in Mansfield. We've been working with the partners, with the Nottinghamshire Police and the local neighbourhood teams to try and reduce some of that. We are going to be pushing our Fire Stoppers campaign as well, which is a confidential reporting line similar to Crime Stoppers, where local members of the community can report confidentially if they know individuals that have been deliberately fire setting. So we're going to give that push during this financial year, just to see if we can really, really target hard in that area to reduce those peaks. But yeah, as soon as the warm weather came out, COVID restrictions lifted, everybody was out and about, the number of calls increased.
Yeah, just curious, yeah.
Any other questions so far, Scott?
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, officers will recall from the last committee that we had, I asked a question around sort of the on-call availability around Southwood, and you described some of the sort of the ongoing challenges, but just referring back to the graph on page 13 at the bottom, and also picking up on the back of the earlier opening conversation around Ashfield and Retford. Bingham, can we expand on that a little bit further and just provide some reassurances that that's sort of been looked at, addressed? From a personal point of view, I went to school in Bingham. I've seen how that town has expanded rapidly over a number of years, and also in how it serves that very rural aspect of South Nottinghamshire as well.
Yeah. Specifically for Bingham, there are a number of elements or a number of actions that we do to support individual crewing or individual stations, but there's also more wider ones that we do to support all of the on-call stations. But specifically Bingham and Stapleford are part of a trial that we're undertaking, where we're looking to change the offer to the community in lots of ways by changing some of the contractual options that are available. We're working in partnership, we're working very closely with the workforce, with the trade unions, to be able to make the ask and some of the challenges they have from some of the terms and conditions that are very long standing, and talk about a minimum of 84 hours as a minimum contract, and we all know 84 hours is quite a significant ask from a member of the community to take that on board, whether it be their primary role or their secondary role. So we've introduced a number of contracts that we're trialling with the aim of making the ask a lot more appealing, so it will not only hopefully bear the fruits of increased satisfaction levels, increased availability ultimately. We're hoping that it will improve individuals' well-being, but predominantly we're also hoping that it will become more appealing, and the ask will not be, if you imagine as a recruitment process, yes, come and work for us, a fantastic job, and everybody says, yeah, fantastic job, but can you do 84 hours? It knocks the stuffing out of them a little bit. So we're trying to decrease that, so people will be able to work that number of hours. People will be able to give 63, some people will be able to give 42. So we're trying to change the ask there to make it more appealing. It is hopeful that towards the September, October time, we'll have an evaluation of that programme that we can report back, and then we'll work with the workforce and also trade unions to be able to see if it's something that we can further expand on.
Thank you.
All right. It's a bit of a perennial problem. I think we've been reviewing this
Yeah.
forever. Is there a difference between the challenges faced by personnel changing and maybe COVID as well in on-call? Has that had a significant impact that it's coming to the end? Or?
I think it's fair to say that the COVID at the time, as has been reported to the committee, had a positive impact on the individual's availability because the requirements and pressures on their social time and maybe other work requirements really was very beneficial. But if we are to believe as the report within almost a national perspective, a lot of people have taken stock of the life. Yeah, and the priorities.
True.
And as we see society changes and what their expectations are, the way and the contract that we currently ask people to undertake, it challenges people's values and what's important to them.
Is there any other comments so far?
Yeah, on the on-call situation, are you limiting the radius somebody has to live from the fire station? Because I think now, like Eastwood, where I'm a councillor, it's a town where people tend to live because of affordability, but they might work in Nottingham or Derby. I'm just thinking it makes life difficult for
It does. It presents a number of challenges, and you'll see from some of the reporting, particularly when we report Ashfield and Retford, the significant challenge or the implications of that is that daytime cover, particularly between working hours, is a challenge, and that's the reason we're trying to make the ask and the appeal a lot more broader, so we can be more diverse in terms of the people that we want to undertake the role. All those things that you're talking about and all the things that have been raised by members, we don't suffer this in isolation. We're very much part of the national infrastructure. We're very much participating and leading in many areas to be able to do things differently and challenge and to try and meet some of the challenges that the current contractual arrangements present us.
If I could, Chair, I think some of the challenge of the on-call, and it's not the kind of anti-national terms and conditions, but there are restrictions that need to be dealt with nationally about what can and can't be done. Some of the mechanisms is a bit clunky for us to do that. Society, locally, my concern is Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. It's okay to talk about nationally, but I live, work, and serve this organisation. So on-call is a problem because towns are dormitory. People live and sleep there but don't work there. The restrictions we have historically have been 5 minutes within the station. There are places where that can be flexed though, where what is the speed of the next nearest appliance? So if it's 10 minutes for the next nearest appliance to get there, why don't we expand it out to 8 minutes as a radius to the station if the maths works? And that is certainly something through the on-call, through Mick and the team, that we will be exploring as well. On-call as a system, I had a conversation with Hereford and Worcester's chief last week. They have managed to move their on-call numbers from 300 to 400 on-call numbers over a decade. So I would sort of say that's really, really good results, but it's took them a decade, and the demographic in Hereford and Worcester is different to Nottingham. So it is a real challenge that I think we're just going to continue to face. And it is problematic, and some of the support, I think it's part of the review that the Chair has spoken about earlier as part of the fire cover review. There may well be options coming back about how we use wider crewing and resources available to us to cover peak problems in on-call places as well as whole-time places.
I just think it's got to be more flexible now because the way people operate their lives now is completely different. Say 20 or 30 years ago, it was come home at 5 o'clock, whatever, and you didn't go out and what. But it's completely different now, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. We've not got the heavy industry that maybe Ashfield or Harworth would have seen from the colliery. So Harworth, I think you'd see more people working Rotherham, Doncaster, Sheffield now than would have, say, locally in big shift-based days, nights after shifts where lots of people from collieries and heavy industry would have worked at on-call stations decades gone by.
Yeah.
They're not there anymore as a workforce.
It's been a challenge forever, but I do think the review and one of the unforeseen benefits of COVID, and people, as Mick was saying, is re-evaluating the life. So there's the option that a lot more people might fit into this than previously did, students or people who work from home or who have more flexibility. So I think it's about, part of this review is about making people realise this might be an option for them as well. So speaking to our communities, I'm very keen for, at the right point, in the right areas, Eastwood, Bingham, and others, Southwell or Southall, to make sure that we use members to communicate as well, make sure we get out to our communities in those areas so that they know that this stuff happening. I know I always know Ashfield has a big banner up when it's happening, but I think local members have that knowledge about where's the best way to communicate and who we're missing out, so I think that would be really important. Is there anything else so far, or shall I let Mick make some progress because we're only halfway through his report?
Thank you.
Go for it, mate.
So it's a double act, so I'm the next one on. So
you
Bryn
on?
Coleman, yeah, I'm
Sorry,
the area
Bryn.
manager, head of prevention, protection and fire investigation. So the next couple of paragraphs, I suppose, are mine really. So if we start at 2.10 in terms of prevention, it says in the report the service has now exceeded 12,000 safe and well visits. Well, even better news than that, from last night we've now exceeded 13,000, so that's probably a record in terms of the number of safe and wells we've ever undertaken in Nottinghamshire. We've been ably assisted in that by 5 additional safe and well operatives that we've had with some government funding. Most local authorities and certainly the Fire and Rescue Service, we were given additional funding for COVID. We took the opportunity to employ people on fixed term contracts. Unfortunately, they finished last night, but they've given us a real boost in terms of the numbers of safe and well that we've been able to undertake across the county. We're also looking at expanding our offer in terms of a vulnerable persons module. So at the moment, we undertake a safe and well on a premise. So 16 Smith Street, for example, will have a safe and well. As we move forward, we're developing our technology so that every individual in that property will have a bespoke safe and well. So everybody will be recorded. The information and the data that we're going to collect from each premise is going to be better, so we can further tailor our offer in terms of fire prevention activities. So that's coming to us hopefully from May of this year. Of the number of incidents that we've attended, I suppose fortunately, and I suppose this is indicative of the message being received, 82% of premises that we've attended that have had a fire have had a smoke alarm, which is really encouraging now, and big leaps over the last decade in terms of smoke alarm ownership. And that exceeds our target of 80%. Slight dip from last year, but again, still a notable target of 82% of premises. Each area, and I suppose this is really important, what we don't have is a broad brush approach to prevention across the county, because as you will be aware as members, each area is bespokely different. So South will be very different from the city centre, Mansfield very different from Rushcliffe. So each of our community safety areas has its own action plan. So that will focus on the particular pertinent risks in that area. So if they've got a river, we'll focus more on water safety. If they've got motorways, if they've got high-speed roads, or we've seen a prevalence of road traffic collisions, we'll focus on road safety. So each of the district prevention officers will work with our response crews to tailor that plan for that area. And I suppose aligned with that, we've got something which is called a National Stay-Wise Education Resources. So this is supported nationally by the National Fire Chiefs Council. And they've got key themes like I've just touched on in terms of water safety, fire safety, road safety. And what we're going to do in the coming year is target what we're going to class as risky schools. It doesn't mean the school's risky, it means it's an area that we've identified through intelligence, through data, through incidents, that we think we can have a big input by targeting those schools and those families and the children in those schools to deliver our prevention messages a bit more targeted really, as opposed to, again, the broad brush approach. What we've probably historically done, certainly junior schools, they love primary schools, love to see a fire appliance, love to see firefighters, but are we really targeting the right areas? So we're going to be a bit more sort of intelligence-led really, I suppose, moving forward. I'm going to pause at that. Anything on prevention before I move on to protection?
Anyone? No, you're free to carry on.
Okay, excellent. So protection, so I suppose prevention is in simplistic terms looking after the person in the premises. Protection is very much the safety of the building, so it's the building fabric, it's your fire alarm systems and all the automated systems which are in there. So my fire safety inspectors, you can see the figures in 2.15 below, the numbers of audits and complaints and safety checks that they've undertaken. I think it's worth members noting we've got increased scrutiny from central government and certainly from HMIC, FRS in terms of the activity of protection. All of that is post-Grenfell from the tragic instances of 5 years ago. So protection really is in the mind's eye of government at this point. And the Protection Department is stepping up to that challenge of inspecting the building stock across the city and county. Is there any questions on protection? Because I've got a little bit further down the report to talk about some of the challenges. But there's nothing on that. Linked with that, unwanted fire signals. So this is basically fire alarm signals that are received to the fire and rescue service from premises. The fire alarm goes off, simulating or alerting us to a fire. Now, I think it's worth remembering we never mobilise to a false alarm. Whenever we mobilise, we're mobilising to an incident. We only ever return from a false alarm. And I think that's really important to get that across. If you look at 2.16, you see the table of the number of activations that we've had. Certainly 20, 21, 22, their figures are comparable with 2019, 2020. We did see a dip in the number of unwanted fire signals in 2020, 2021. You know, and I don't need to point out that was COVID, that was lockdown, everything was a lot quieter operationally for the service and across the country. So that's why you can see the disparity in figures. It has gone back to sort of 2019 levels now, 2020. But for every time we get an unwanted fire signal from a premises, we do write out, and these are non-domestic premises, the protection team do write out, making site owners, responsible persons aware of their responsibilities under the fire safety order. If it's a fourth occurrence, so we've got a problem with the fire alarm system, one of our business safety advocates will go out and give advice. It's very much put an arm around the business, reassuring them, trying to get them to comply, trying to get the systems working properly. If there's a sixth occurrence, we do send a fire safety inspector to see if there's any enforcement activity that we need to take on these premises, because clearly there's an issue in terms of their compliance. I'm sure members will be aware, but the biggest cause of unwanted fire signals are our hospitals across the county. Not surprising with the number of fire alarm, the number of detector heads and automatic systems that are in these premises. But it's also worth bearing in mind a huge risk across the county. You know, you've got non-ambulant patients, you've got people who are very ill with mobility issues. It's really important they have a high degree of fire safety in those premises. So we do get an increased occurrence of false activations in these premises. But again, the Fire Protection Department work really closely with the dedicated fire safety officers throughout the hospitals to try and reduce the occurrences of these incidents. And again, some of the other bigger providers, the housing providers, the arm's reach housing providers from district councils, we work really closely with them to ensure that their systems are the best they possibly can be, so that they are accurate. When we do get an activation, it's generally because it's a fire. But it's, you know, it's work in progress, it's ongoing. I've just come back from a national conference in London where I'm really proud to say Nottinghamshire has been highlighted as best practice in terms of our work that we're doing with the joint audit and inspection team in conjunction with Nottingham City Council. Really proud to see Nottinghamshire and Nottingham up there is highlighted as best practice. In essence, what we've got is fire safety inspectors that work with environmental health officers, and we jointly inspect the high-rise residential stock, predominantly Nottingham City. Not, you know, there are a few exceptions across Rushcliffe and other areas, but predominantly Nottingham City in terms of looking at defects in those premises. It's really good because we've got a broader spread of legislation that's available to us. The environmental health officers from the City Council can use the Housing Act, which is predominantly what we use for enforcement, but again we've got powers under the fire safety order that we can also apply to those premises. I suppose concerning, but it's in the media's attention, is the issues that we have nationally with some of the building stock. There are issues, there are deficiencies, and we're really working with that. But that is a national issue. It's a legacy issue of 20 to 30 years of where the approved documents have been, where the building sector has been. And it's going to take us a long time to get on top of that. And you know, a lot of work is going to be required from a lot of different agencies. That brings nicely onto the future demands of fire protection. Again, I touched on Grenfell earlier, and it's a nice segue for Mick's going to come in shortly to talk about the work we've been doing with Grenfell. But there's the Building Safety Act, which is currently going through the parliamentary process as we speak. Possibly going to be laid in law in April, but that would depend on parliamentary time. That is going to put new burdens on the fire and rescue service. What they are looking at is having multidisciplined teams that's going to be working with building control, working with health and safety executive, and certainly our fire safety inspectors to look at a cradle-to-grave management system of high-rise residential buildings. So again, a lot of work, a lot of new burdens on the service in terms of protection. And there is also talk of us now looking at the building stock of 11 to 18 metres. So we've focused all our attentions quite rightly on the higher risk buildings, which are above 18 metres. But you can imagine a city of Nottingham, there are a considerable number of buildings at 11 to 18, which we still need to look at, probably in the region of 2,500. I spoke to a colleague yesterday or the day before from London Fire Brigade. They're anticipating they've got 75,000 buildings in London alone that could take in the region of 11 years to do a proper audit on. So if that gives you the scale and the gravity of the work that we've got coming our way in protection, you know, it's not to be underestimated.
Chair, if I could, on the protection thing, just around the context. We talked earlier about on-call and the response side of it. I think the fire cover review and the work that we'll bring back this year will try and look at the balance between the demands coming in from Grenfell, which I'm sure members will not want to see us be slow around our response to that. And of course HMI will come back at some point in the future and say, you've known this is coming for years, what have you done about it? And again, that's in the context of you're not likely to get new money for this, so we're likely to be presenting things to members about trying to use what we've got in the best way to deal with risk. That gives you a little bit more context, and I would sort of ask to keep in mind is we need to think about prevention, protection, response in a very holistic way. I know the kind of like the fire deaths, the tragedy at the end is what grabs the press, but I wouldn't want us to see a building in the city, for example. We need to think about what demands we've got now on the resources we've got with the capacity, and whether we need to put some more in there. And again, part of the work that Nick will be doing over the next few months as your assistant chief, that will be where his focus will be.
Thank you. Brilliant. I've got a bit of a question about the audit that we have to do. So if the paper comes in April and then we have so many buildings to audit and then start that piece of work on, permitted development rights have changed as well, so that developers can build up to 18 metres or extend up to 18 metres without notifying any local authority body.
Yeah.
And what's the gap analysis there about how we know, well, someone's just banged that up without us being on our
So the
list?
Building Safety Act is going to focus on buildings in excess of 18 metres. That's where the attention of the Building Safety Act is going to be, and that's where our focus will be. But yeah, I share your concerns about the permitted developments of buildings of 17.99 metres, dare I say,
Yeah.
you know, which you know we know happens. We need a cultural change. We need a cultural change amongst government, which you can see has been in process. But we also need a cultural change within the building sector, because developers do build to 17.99 metres, you know, and they will push everything that they can in terms of legislation. We need that to change. We need the buildings to be safe and compliant, not just to comply with legislation, which is has probably been the case for the last couple of decades.
So is there an opportunity, I assume through the LGA and their fire board, to chief officers to make sure that we've at least highlighted that? Has that been happening?
Yeah, so National Fire Chiefs Council for the last couple of years have got a dedicated protection policy reform unit. They're working really, really closely with government and the LGA. Certainly getting our point of view across as fire and rescue services in terms of best practice on what we see as a sector of how buildings and the industry, the construction industry, ought to be performing. So we've got really good inroads with that and working very closely with the LGA.
If it's necessary at the right point, while we've still got time to feed in, my very good friend who's the deputy leader of Isle of Wight is the chairman of the fire board
Excellent.
for the LGA.
Okay.
An independent, so good, very good relationships, and he's very open to feeding stuff in.
Yeah.
So if that's useful, I can
Yeah,
set that up on the right.
it's
point.
very much a live issue, as you can probably
absolutely
imagine.
is. Yeah, but he's a very good guy.
I think my key worry for a fire and rescue service, Chair, is that the legislation is not. I think what we're doing, Dangerous Act, it talked about systemic failings. My worry is with some of the amendments, we're just going to see new systemic failings in 20 years' time, is my worry. And the fire and rescue service will be expected to pick up that at the back end when all the dominoes have fallen over. And I think the construction industry and regulation have got to deal with some of those things to design them out. And I am concerned as an officer, I might just not got the full picture, that isn't being taken seriously nationally, as it should be.
I think you're right. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, I was going to come on to this. I mean, I think first of all, the joint audit inspection team has been really good. I've got a couple of questions around that. First of all, obviously we've done inspections, and as we were saying, I mean, from Nottingham, obviously we've had a lot of high-rise going up. We're going to have more in terms of students, and we can all take a view on, you know, how regulated it is and etc. I mean, first of all, obviously I'm concerned about as you were saying, how much input do we get into these buildings in the first place? Because there's some of the older ones that have probably got issues to them, and there's a lot going up and there's a lot going to go up. I mean, there's a lot up near Loxley House. We've got 3 or 4 going up as we speak, haven't we? In terms of that, and then in terms of the schedules of work that we've been asking in other premises, I mean, how serious have they been? Has it been things that have been really quite serious? And sorry again, and in going forward, you know, what can we do? Because as you say, workload's going to increase dramatically. We're starting to think off the top of my head of several really quite large projects that are going up in the next year, to be honest.
So in terms of the Building Safety Act, all buildings in excess of 18 metres, we're going to be a statutory consultee, so we will be absolutely part of that process. Different legislation below 18 metres, and there are still some issues with that will sit firmly with the local authority and not with the Fire and Rescue Service. We will comment, but you know, we have little opportunity to influence planning to any broader extent. In terms of the Joint Audit and Inspection Team, we've probably audited in excess of 120 buildings now. And there are only 2 of those 120 which are fully compliant. Now, you know, that means there's no further work that's going to be required. A lot of the buildings have got issues with compartmentation, with some of the glazing that's not correct. There are fire shafts that are missing. There are some significant concerns that we're working with the City Council, and we are issuing enforcement activity, predominantly through Nottingham City Council and the Housing Act, like I've alluded to. But yes, there are a lot of issues that we're uncovering with these. In Nottingham, we've got 23 buildings, high-rise buildings of concern. So we have to share that knowledge with our operational colleagues so that they're aware of these buildings. Some of the buildings have still got a wake-in watch, and some have still got flammable cladding on. That process has been removed. So yeah, it's a significant issue, without a doubt. And we are part of that process, you know, and we will influence it as much as we can through the Protection Policy Reform Unit as we can, but it is limited.
I think my kind of response around the city, I've got a meeting that's been arranged with the directors in the city. I'm trying to see the chief executive. We're all making the point. I know that the city has got significant challenges, and I think enforcement and regulation sometimes is something that isn't seen as a risk. You know, there's a challenge around child and adult social care and education.
Yeah.
My concern is, and my role as your incoming chief fire officer, is that I have to make a point about the legislation that I'm responsible for, and I'll be trying to work with partners to sort of say that we need to pay attention to this, because it may be when we've retired and gone that there is a tragedy, because we are being asked nationally, this must never be allowed to happen again. Do I have the confidence that with the approach that's being taken, I think it's improving the legislation, but I can't give any guarantees or assurances that it wouldn't happen again, or that I'm confident of a building of 15 metres high in the city that is enclosed by lots of other buildings around it, where this would not happen again, given what we're seeing with the Joint Audit and Inspection Team. The follow-on of that, of course, is you visit these and find out something in the first place. You now can't go and visit lots of new ones because you're now taking enforcement actions about ones you've already seen. So you're already building a workload of the ones you're seeing, never mind getting to some of the more risky ones as well. So it's welcomed in terms of the JATE, and I suppose really, if I can make any kind of lobby to yourself, Councillor, for the city, is that I think if we can, we need to try and do more around the JATE, given the buildings that are going up, and given, I think, the refurbishment and repurposing of buildings. The new buildings I'm less worried about, whether I'm correct to do so or not. The older buildings that are getting repurposed, which may be coming into domestic accommodation because of not office accommodation, because people aren't having buildings anymore. So I think some of the buildings we do see is where they're basically putting a compartment inside an old building. And so I do have some concerns about the older building stock. And Bryn's right around the Building Safety Act. In scope at the minute is 18 metres and above. All those other buildings over time will become in scope. So of course the demand then to inspect them is greater as well, both for ourselves and the council, local authorities. Thank you, Chair.
Is it, I mean, I've sat on planning, local planning authority for 15 years and can't say I've ever seen comments from the fire authority on it. Is it worth us making sure that we've communicated with all the LPAs across Nottinghamshire and the city that there's a legislative change, and that for certain things, particularly conversions, as the chief says, about medium rise, that we ought to be a statutory, or we are a statutory consultee, and that they perhaps just need to refresh that.
We do feed in, as you're aware, to local authorities. We have got that close relationship. You see the figures in terms of the consultations that we undertake, but they are back to local authority. And I accept your point that very rarely is a fire and rescue concern top of the agenda for planning, which we hope is now going to start to change, predominantly from the Building Safety Act again.
Okay, I just think we need to shine a light on it so they remember their obligations. I mean, members, we've got a number of members that can take it back so they know, but yeah, I think we have done our bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, Eddie.
No, just a quick one. I don't think there's a focus on me. I was at Job and Economy in the borough last night, and the HMOs come up a lot now because they're getting real problem in some areas. Are we doing anything with those?
Again, in terms of the legislation, limited from Fire and Rescue Services point of view, because that will be a local authority that are the enforcing authority for HMOs.
Yeah.
We have a lot of the communal areas, so the communal areas of the entrance and corridors. But apart from that, that is a local authority environmental health enforcement issue. And this is some of the issues because you've got different authorities enforcing different areas of the building. That's why the JATE is so important, because you've got inspectors with two different hats on going in, and there's also a burden that we don't want to increase on the responsible person. You know, as business owners, you don't want somebody from the City Council to come in, then 2 days later somebody from the Fire and Rescue Service. If we can try and coordinate that enforcement activity and that inspection activity, surely it's got to be better for everybody, because we can also look at things from different perspectives.
Yeah, because this is going what you were saying about old buildings being repurposed.
Yeah.
And if it's a certain size, there's no, you don't have to tell anybody.
Yeah.
So you could end up 6 or 7 people living in a house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very good point, actually. I mean, the small ones slipped through the net, and
Yeah.
we approved one in Ashfield last week that was 22. And I thought, crikey, that's big. But we've just had a pre-app for the Hucknall Police Station for 71 bed HMO, and that's not an 11-metre building. So
No.
it could very easily slip through the net.
Yeah.
It would be a huge
Well,
danger
yeah.
if it's.
Yeah.
I think outside of this meeting, because I don't want to labour on it too much, but I think we perhaps ought to think about finding a way of ensuring our planning colleagues in the district and boroughs know that we are there to be supportive. And
Fantastic.
yeah, I think there's a way of that. Right, I've got Nick then Scott.
I mean, to go on to it's a balance, isn't it? I mean, I will raise this because obviously we've got different issues in the city. Obviously, you might say to a certain extent that, you know, particularly student accommodation, perhaps them going into the centre might mean there's less of a fire hazard in places like Lenton. But I mean, there are places I'm thinking of Bradford and Lenton in particular, ex-office buildings or industrial buildings that are now large-scale student accommodation. And I think there's going to be more because, you know, in terms of with COVID, etc., we know what's going to happen in the city centre. We've got the Broadmarsh site and all sorts of things going on there. And obviously, you know, I mean, it's not for this we've got a balance because society's changing, more people moving into the city centre, and for us, that's part of our economic generation, isn't it? And as you've identified, we have financial challenges, to say the least. But it is something that's of concern, and I'll raise it with colleagues because you do think, well, what's going on here? I'm not suggesting it's like anarchy, but it's good to see buildings going up, and obviously as a council, you think this is fantastic. Our city's developing, we're bringing in jobs, etc., and people living in the city centre, which are lower crime and all that sort of stuff. But there is severe implications about fire, I suppose.
Yeah.
At least the new station's near them anyway, where it's covered in.
Yeah, I think the regulator's code is quite clear that the regulator should not be an overdue burden on business.
No.
And I completely accept that. As I've kind of grown up in this organisation, I kind of see the value of that. A prosperous city is a prosperous county, is a prosperous towns because of the visitors we get. I absolutely get that. But what that requires is very close working with contractors that may be wanting to make their profits on it and go away. So we've had new buildings, refurbished buildings, that have got sometimes in excess of hundreds of non-compliant issues in them when they're first refurbished, and that could be where they've just not sealed a hole going through 2 compartments with a cable going through it, and they could be thousands of those things that people would never see because they're behind a wall or under a suspended ceiling. So there are those things around the standards of the construction, the planning process. I'm not saying that approved inspector process when it took it away from local authority building control is a reason for this, but is it a question for me about the closeness sometimes of approved inspectors, contractors and all those kind of things, because it's an unknown to me. I know what auditors go and do, I know that, so I can speak with some confidence or not in that. But in terms of the city, I think it is that I think we've got to be very realistic about the prosperity for the city and making sure that people in 10 years' time are going to be safe in that building.
Scott?
Just a quick one, sort of returning to the theme of the impact of the building safety bill, and I'm thinking purely from a workforce point of view, and obviously you've been very clear in terms of the additional pressures that we're placing on the protection teams, but obviously when we were discussing the on-call availability and sort of the 80-odd hours being off-putting, is there an element of this that could actually have a sort of a significant impact on that workforce morale, in the sense of we've got all these new buildings coming into scope, and it's going to be a sort of a mountain to climb, and people under Craig's point around, this work could go on for 10, 15, 20 years, but then there's another major incident, and obviously from that impact of where Grenfell was 5 years ago, where the thing with blame was apportioned. What sort of work is going on at the moment to look at that from a workforce point of view?
I think it's fair to say that we recognise I need, as head of protection, more fire safety inspectors, and it's work that I'm doing with the Deputy Chief and the Assistant Chief to look at the resources across the organisation. We are definitely going to need more fire safety inspectors. The challenge for ourselves as officers and members is, with a reduction in our financial envelope, how do we determine how and where do we get those fire safety inspectors from across the organisation. The other challenge is that we can't recruit fire safety inspectors that are competent and to come straight in, because every service has got that same challenge. So the issue that we get, we have to recruit them unqualified. It takes probably 2 years to get them up to speed and qualified so they can undertake audits, because there's new legislation, there's new burdens in terms of the competency framework of what is required of a fire safety inspector, and quite rightly, it is now more arduous to become qualified. So yes, there is a challenge for that. And hopefully we'll have some further information later on in the year on how we propose to put those further fire safety inspectors there, because we do need that additional capacity.
Thank you. Is there anything else on this? Can we make progress? Is it you, Mick, on Grenfell?
Yeah, I'll be very, very brief. It's obviously it warrants a significant discussion, but as a summary, it's been presented to both the committee and authority over a number of years now about the actions that we've undertaken to meet some of the Grenfell recommendations. And it's really pleasing to see that we've finally reached the conclusion of some of that work. And when I say the conclusion of some of that work, the work that's within our own control, within our own resources. And predominantly that's around procedural changes, that's around additional equipment, additional training, support. A lot of that's focused around our work with Derbyshire around the joint control. So that work has been completed, and we're very satisfied, very pleased with the work that's been undertaken. There are obviously continued the changes in legislation. The implications of that will continually be sort of implemented over a period of time. So the ramifications and the implications for Grenfell will go on for a long time. So I'm not saying that we can sit back and feel supremely confident. These implications will continue. We'll continue to react to changes in legislation. We'll continue to act with in terms of opportunities to further improve, whether it be that technology-wise, whether that provision of risk information, which is further. It's another report within the pack that is very relevant to that. But I just want to report to members that we have made significant progress on that.
Good stuff. Thank you. Any comments on that? Right. Thank you all for a detailed discussion. Are members happy to note the contents of that report? Yeah. Thank you. Right. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the 2021 Fatal Fires Review, which starts at page 23 of your papers. Bryn?
That's me, Chair. Thank you. Perhaps the saddest report that we have to bring to authority each year, and it forced me to present it to you today. So this is for the calendar year 2021, so 1st of January for clarity to 31st of December. It's also worth noting that not all the incidents that have been discussed in this report have currently been heard by Her Majesty's Coroner at an inquest. So the information contained is as accurate as we have at the time of writing this report. And again, I don't want to go into specifics of individual cases, because some will have been heard by Her Majesty's Coroner, others won't. So it's very much an overview in terms of numbers, but I'll try and be as open as I can with you in terms of that. Unfortunately, you'll see that within 2021 there's been an increase in fire fatalities within the county from the preceding 4 years. So unfortunately we've had 7 incidents that have resulted in 7 fatalities in 2021. I suppose if we look at the averages from 2017 to 2020, 7 is the average per year. It's just unfortunate that we have actually met that target or unfortunate number within 2021. If you look at 1.5, it gives a breakdown from our 5 fatalities from 2017 to 2020. 2020, there was 3 within the calendar year, but 1 individual unfortunately succumbed to their injuries within 2020 that resulted from a fire in 2019. So there's a bit of disparity there. You can see 2018 was a particularly horrific year for 5 fatalities, but it gives you a flavour really of the tragic incidents that we are attending on average across the city and county. I suppose every 5 fatality does give us the opportunity, though, to demonstrate learning and push the prevention messages across within the communities. It does highlight, the need for protection activities. So the 2 of the fatalities occurred in January of 2020, one February, 1 in June, 1 in July, and 1 in December. So, there is no sort of peak month, if you like. The 7 deaths, again, there's a fair split across both city and county, as you can see from 2.2. Interesting, if that's the right word. The 4 of the fatalities are from were over age 65, the youngest being 53, the oldest being 85 years. So it is predominantly the older age group which are succumbing to 5 fatalities. I'm sure members will be aware of the Charlie P profile, which we talk about quite a bit. This is the acronym that we use to try and get the information across to partners of those most at risk from fire. So the Charlie P profile factors: reduced mobility, they live alone, they're elderly, they're smoker, they've got care needs. Some of them are known to social services and other authorities in addition to ourselves. They may have mobility issues, mental health issues and other medical conditions that make them more susceptible and vulnerable to fire. And we see that time and time again in terms of the 5 fatalities. Of the 7 fatalities, 3 of the addresses were known to us as a service. Of the 3 addresses, you can see in 2.4, we were offering safe and wells with 1, but declined. Another was conducted at address 2, and concerns were raised with other partner agencies. And as you can see, probably some of the challenges we get with address 3, we've visited 12 times to the occupier, fitting extra smoke alarms in the bedrooms and living conditions. Some of these individuals have got quite sort of chaotic backgrounds and lifestyles that contribute to this. So we really have to work closely with partners, predominantly in health, to try and overcome some of these issues. But these issues, some of these individuals have got challenging issues, whether it's with mental health or alcohol and particularly smoking. You put all those together, it makes them particularly vulnerable from fire, sadly. After each activity, activity in 2021, after each fire, I chair a serious event review group. So we bring relevant partners, internal relevant partners together. So I'll speak with the incident commander, I'll speak with fire control, and I'll speak with colleagues in prevention. And we really want to build up a picture of, 1, the operational incident, what's occurred at that time to result in a fatality, what actions have we undertaken, but also what activity of prevention taken in the run-up to that. So is the premises known to us? What are all the partner agencies saying? And we try and get as much learning as we can from each death to make it, to move the agenda forward, if you like, in terms of prevention and what we can get from that. We're also starkly aware that if there's been a fatality in a community, you've seen a lot of blue lights, you've seen a lot of fire and rescue service activity. That is an opportunity for us to get in there, to talk to the community about prevention, where sometimes it may be a closed door, it's not on their agenda, they've got very busy lives, but this brings it into sharp focus in terms of a fatality and getting that message across. And we are really successful with our community engagement and reassurance activity, seeing firefighters on the streets, knocking on doors, being high profile at that time. We recognise as a really important prevention activity. So the majority, all bar 1 of the fatals in 2021 occurred in domestic premises. So that's where they are occurring. As I say, 1 was in a moving vehicle. But we have undertaken community reassurance and engagement activities. 788 properties have been visited on the back of that and advice given, and you can see the figures in 2.7 in terms of the number of safe and wells and smoke alarms, etc. That we've done a lot of door knocking, a lot of engagement activities on the back of those tragic circumstances. You'll probably be aware that we've got an occupational therapist, and when you mention to the public that the Fire and Rescue Service have the service as an occupational therapist, you get quite a lot of quizzical looks. But I can assure you that one of the most important elements that we've got is that close involvement of occupational therapist with the Fire and Rescue Service. She's an active member of the NHS, so she spends half her time within the NHS setting or other half her time with us in the Fire and Rescue Service. So the data sets, the contacts, the information that she can bring us from a health perspective. She also chairs some of the I don't know how to put this across, more challenging cases, a serious case review of individuals that we're currently working with. She will look at all the interventions that we've got and suggest further interventions in terms of health and other issues that can assist these individuals, because it's all fine fitting a smoke alarm so somebody knows that the property's on fire. Little use if that individual can then not exit the property. All we're doing is making them aware that there's a fire that they can't exit from. So we really work with that, and I can't underestimate how important the occupational therapist is to us. It's excellent. And again, we're seen as one of the leads in the country in terms of how we've engaged that occupational therapist. I suppose one of the questions is, how do we know that the Charlie fatal profile is working? Well, we've sat down with the occupational therapist, but we've also sat down with Nottingham Trent University, and we've had an academic evaluation of that profiling that we've done. We know what the figures are, we know the profile of the individuals that have died, and we've asked for that academic study, and sure enough that they've validated that we are targeting those right areas, the individuals, again, elderly, issues with mobility, issues with smoking, issues with alcohol, all those most at risk. Moving forward then, the planned activity for this year, and it's, as you can imagine, it's already ongoing. We need to constantly educate our partners about the Charlie profile. Like with every public sector, there's a churn of staff, and it's a bit like painting the fourth bridge. Once we've educated partners, we have to redo that again, because people move, people get promoted, people retire. So there's an ongoing issue with making partners aware of the Charlie profile. I've got fire investigators as well that work really closely with prevention, and they come under the same department now, because the issues that we learn from fire investigations, we need to translate that into prevention activity. So having those working closely together is really beneficial. As you can imagine, they go straight in after a fatal fire, investigate it, and we pick that learning up straight away as part of that serious event review group. We also work really closely with the City Council and the County Council in terms of trading standards. We want to be focusing on electrical safety, if there's any issues with electrical appliances, any trading standards, substandard material that's out there. We're linked in with national databases that's centred in London Fire Brigade. So again, if there's any safety alerts, we want to get those out to our partners within trading standards. And a recent move, our fire investigators are now based here at Sherwood Lodge, and they're co-located with the crime scene investigators. So again, we're really close with the crime scene investigators who jointly investigate the fatal fires with us. And I'll pause at that. Is there any questions on that? I'm aware it's quite an emotive paper, it's quite a sad paper.
Very bleak. Nobody wants to be at the top of this chart. Nick?
Yeah, there's some tragedies and there's been some great work around it, and I appreciate the difficulties. I mean, speaking from a lay point of view, you look at the individual there with it offered 12 times to have the stuff fitted on, and you do wonder. I mean, sometimes, obviously we don't really have powers of enforcement, and what happens in properties where there may be illegal activity going on. To be frank, we have people that might be growing cannabis, or there might be the stuff going on in a premises that is itself quite a significant fire risk. Obviously, they're not going to let people in. What we can actually do about that in terms of agencies, and then what the role is elsewhere, because in some cases with these vulnerable people, you'd like to have thought that the neighbours or the family or somebody might be keeping an eye on them or helping them out. And I know that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, so the ones that are known, I suppose, to the wider establishment, it's easier to try and engage with them. It's not always successful, because health partners, social services are generally involved. But these individuals have got significant issues potentially with their lifestyle. They don't want help in some instances, as you can see from probably address 3. There's ongoing concerns with that. The ones that cause us more concern are the ones that are not known to any of the wider services. So they live a reclusive lifestyle, often quite sad, often in quite austere conditions. Very, very difficult to get people that are off-grid or off the radar of any of the public sectors. They choose to live a very quiet, so as I say, austere lifestyle, and often they are of that Charlie profile again. Very, very challenging, you know, and I think this report is indicative of those individuals in society, that some of them, you know, of the 7, only 3 premises were known to us. The others are off-grid for whatever reason. They don't want to be known to the wider establishment.
Anyone else? Go on, Scott.
Thank you. Just a comment really to pick up on the point that Bryn was making around sort of the occupational therapist role. Up until probably the back end of last year, my mother-in-law was in that position in Aldgate in Leicestershire, fire and rescue. So I got to see real first-hand, I suppose, and actually sort of overlapping with my role at County Hall a little bit. I think actually, it's obviously adult social care. I think there's a lot more work we can do there to sort of link up a little bit further. So I will take that away and come back to you.
Thank you.
Just on that one, Chair and Councillor, certainly a conversation of that's a temporary post at the minute. It's in the CRMP, as Bryn's said, to substantiate it. My personal view is that it's okay substantiating the one, but we're missing the longer term. This is growing as an issue in society. So there'll be a challenge about, well, how much of that capacity should we actually have in the organisation? So as opposed to the one, which is predominantly dealing with the city area, we have got problems in the county.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything to add before we move? All right. Thank you. Members happy to accept the report? Yeah. Thank you very much. Right. Finally, we're on the update from the areas for improvement from the 2019 inspections, pages 31 of your agenda. Mick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report has been brought to the committee, and we look for members to agree closure of the area for improvement 9. Area improvement 9 has been brought to this committee a few times in the past, both as an update and also of challenges that we've experienced in terms of bringing closure to this particular issue. The AFI, as it's referred to, or areas for improvement, was areas that was identified by the 2019 Her Majesty's Inspectorate inspection. There was 24 of those areas, and 12 of those areas related to and was passed to the Community Safety Committee to provide that level of scrutiny around us delivering it against those particular areas of improvement. This is the last one that's on the list. The previous ones have already been agreed to be closed. This one relates to, and I'll read it from the report, is AFNI is to ensure that mobile data terminals are reliable to allow staff to access risk information. Essentially, that is a onboard computer system that we have on our frontline appliances that allows us to access and retrieve data information, whether that be on the technology of a car, but this is more predominantly around the layout of the building, the particular risk that were in the building, and what measures were in the building would assist us in dealing with an incident that occurs within the building. There has been some ongoing challenges with regards to this, and there is still work to be done in the future when we look at the procurement of a new mobilising system. This will form part of that procurement process. But to date, we are confident that we've addressed the AFI9, and we are confident that firefighters have the risk information. It's not something where we stop from today. We continually work towards and scrutinise the work that's been undertaken, when we feel that we need via internal scrutiny, internal governance that sits below the committee, about ongoing reassurance that this information is being provided to the firefighters on the front end. So whilst we're seeking closure of the AFI9, it's not something that we're going to take our focus away from. With this, there's still continual scrutiny and long-term objectives that will relate to further improving work around this particular area.
Thank you. I must say I'm delighted. I've been losing sleep about this. I've read more reports about Area 9 than Area 51. I'm sure they're both as esoteric. I'm very pleased. It's been a long time coming that we can close this. So any members got any comments. I think we have discussed it at length in previous meetings, so I think we're all pleased to see it finished. Is everybody happy to see it formally closed? Thank you. I'll take that as a yes from everyone. And then I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your patience and input, and safe journey home. Thank you.